Hello, can you hear me?
Yes, I can perfectly. Thank you.
Okay, let me just make you loud on my end, so that I can record it better. Okay. All right.
Sure.
If there are any problems with the audio, just let me know.
Yeah, sure, absolutely. Okay, thanks so much for taking the time to speak to me today. I'm fascinated by your case. I was originally alerted to it by, I'm not sure whether you're familiar with Robin Ramsey of Lobster Magazine.
Oh no, not yet. I should check that.
Well, he takes a I won't use the word sympathetic, but he takes a kind of a realist view with targeted individuals such as yourself, and essentially he has there are a number of TIs, if you don't mind me using that parlance, who he regards as kind of extremely credible and worthy of attention, and you are one of them. He mentioned, I believe it was, he mentioned you took your case to court.
Yes, that's right. Yes.
Yeah, and I guess I read the papers when they were online, and I couldn't find them when I checked recently. But I think that to my mind, they kind of demonstrated the difficulty of getting these cases to court. And I mean, in your case, it seemed, at least in my mind, it seemed the judge was, at least open to your suggestions.
Yes, well, the case was in 2016, and
Yes.
there were 3 judges actually.
Sure.
So the very first one, Judge Spencer, he was very, very good, I have to say.
Sure.
And the second one was Judge Edis. Also, he gave me a time extension that I asked for, which I needed desperately for the sabotage. But the third judge, he actually skipped one bit of my evidence, which was a written email by Carl Clark, who is the MI6 whistleblower, who put in writing that his assessment was that I was being attacked by a special branch. And
That's absolutely fascinating. I'd love to get a copy of that if you can send it over.
Yes, sure, I can. I'm about to make all my evidence public.
That's fantastic.
And I'm not sure. Are you familiar with the overall what's happening in this to do with this criminality in the global sphere? Shall I give you just a brief summary of where we are?
Yeah. I mean, I guess. Sorry, my Skype's kind of acting up in the background. Give me one second. Sure. Okay. Well, I mean, I guess could you possibly, first, tell. It'd be great to talk about. I mean, do you think that it's necessary to talk about that first before going into your particulars?
Oh, whichever way round you would like. I guess the only thing I wanted to mention as far as court cases are concerned is that so mine was in 2016. In a few months before, there was the case of Philip Kerr versus MI5.
Who? Sorry.
It's Philip Kerr. So Kerr is written Kerr.
Yeah, sure.
Versus MI5. That was a pretty big case. And this is all, court cases are great because they are a public record with definite documentation. And he has a website, and I have got the evidence that he submitted to court, and there are some bombshells in that. But also coming up are court cases, one in Switzerland by a gentleman called Mr. Thomas. And that's Tomys, and that will be on the 1st of February. And I'm supporting that case as an expert witness, if you like, or a supporting witness. And these cases are important. Oh yes, there's also the case of Mr. Thomas is on the 1st of February. On the 15th of February is a case in France. That's Frédéric Laroche, also against Secret Service criminality. And Mr. Thomas is in Switzerland, and then upcoming this year is also my court case, because I will go back to court. And there's the case of Melanie Richan in Belgium.
Sure.
So all of these, and then I'm also hoping that all of my 3 American colleagues will also start their own court cases in the US, because they're also being trafficked. But what's really important for us is 2 executive orders by Donald Trump. One of them was on the 21st of December, which is a global executive order allowing to asset freeze the assets of human traffickers worldwide. And the second one was declaring January the anti-slavery, anti-human trafficking month, and also declaring human trafficking a national emergency. And that's quite something to take in, actually.
Yeah, sure. Absolutely. So, yeah, I mean, I guess, like, so, yeah, if you could talk me through your experiences. So when did this, what happened and when did it start?
So I went through a process like every single victim. I began with thinking that my targeting started, and that would have been, the beginning of November 2011, when I attended a High Court case, which was Berezovsky versus Abramovich. And at the time I was a researcher at St. John's College, Oxford, and I had changed. I was in particle physics originally, then I changed to medical physics for a project. And when I saw huge corruption in medical physics, I started, and also the financial crisis had happened, I started studying complex human systems. And as a researcher of that, I wanted to begin with the English legal system.
Yes.
And my first case study was Berezovsky versus Abramovich because it was so famous, it was in the papers, it was also the longest running case I knew. And after the first week of attending court, just in the public gallery, just witnessing, MI5 began to stalk me, but in a very overt fashion, so that they placed an agent to wait for me in front of my drive every single morning and stalked me all the way to court and in the evening back home. So that's when it all began, and it became ever more aggressive after the court case. They didn't really stop the stalking. They started a program of I now recognize it as setting up certain conditioning triggers. So they would play out the same scene over and over. They would be stalking me, guys in long grey trench coats and black hats would be stalking me. In Oxford repeatedly, and then they expanded the stalking to Germany when I visited my sister with my husband. So they also made it clear by stalking my sister before I even arrived. And so when I arrived, the guy with the black hat and the black coat was already waiting, staring at her, and then he stared and grinned at me. And through that, they really showed me that they had my family under observation as well. And threatening scenes like that followed. All these grotesque scenes of gang stalking will be in my court case that I witnessed when I was in Oxford. But then what really started happening was that they began with break-ins. So several times I came home and I felt that things had been rearranged. But then
very Stasi, that, isn't it? It's a Setzung. I believe is
exactly. It is exactly the Zersetzungs program, and the first time it was really overt, so that I could also prove it to myself. It wasn't just a hunch, and this this weird feeling of thinking you're coming home and you think, hang on, did I really close my laptop? I don't think I did, and that sort of stuff. But then eventually when I came home, it was very overt because they had rearranged my shoe cupboard. And I had, because Oxford has so little space, I had put my shoes in a very particular order to fit them all. And they had completely rearranged it in a demonstrative fashion so that I couldn't really, put the shoes that I was wearing back into the cupboard. So that's when it was clear that they were going in and out of my flat. And from the time I went to the High Court as an observer at the time, my life completely changed because these people did everything to make it clear to me that they were observing me in my private home. At that time, I wasn't really physically attacked with electromagnetic weapons, but they made it clear that they knew exactly when I'm leaving my flat and so on. And sometimes I felt that they were coming in at night when I was sleeping, but that I couldn't really prove. So what happened then is I felt I can't really go to the police because the these Zersetzungs offenses are all such by design that they're either too ridiculous or too piffling as an offense. And I didn't really understand what I was the victim of at the time. So I thought, okay, this is just Britain. It's crazy. It's a surveillance society. I'm going back to Germany. It will be fine. But it followed me to Germany, and in Germany it became even harder, even more in your face. And so in Germany, I kind of tolerated it for, I think, a year or a year and a half. And then I told my husband what was going on. And before, I was even scared to really tell people because I was intimidated and I thought that people wouldn't believe me. And then I tried to go and talk to a lawyer. And I said that I was a victim of stalking, and she advised me to get my file from the Verfassungsschutz, which is German domestic intelligence. And they said they have nothing on the file for me. I mean, I haven't committed any criminal offense. But now I know that's a complete lie, and the Verfassungsschutz is one of the main bodies organizing this. But anyway, so they didn't have anything in terms of criminal records, of course. And then my lawyer also told me, so the first meeting I had with her, she was very incredulous. And I met her, I think, 2 months later. And her entire attitude changed. And she said, since you have spoken to me, I keep getting calls from actual German officials who work for the government who are telling me exactly the same. So she said, well, if this is a program by German intelligence, I can tell you that there's nothing we can do. And that was shocking to hear, because it was the first time a lawyer said to me, we have this organization in our state called the Secret Service, who are totally, above the law. There's nothing we can do. And so what happened then is that my husband got a job in Switzerland. And
yes. You worked at the CERN laboratory, I believe, did you?
Yes, but that was before all this started.
Oh, right.
So
okay.
I worked at CERN from starting of 2009 till 2010. Yes, so then we left CERN because I actually felt that my husband felt, he was also a particle physicist, he felt that our work in particle physics is not the most that we can contribute to society.
Sure.
So he became a consultant and I changed to medical physics, and that's how we both left the particle physics. But originally I am a particle physicist, and I was for many years also a particle physicist at a big accelerator called DESY. So that's DESY, that's the German electron synchrotron in Hamburg. Yeah. And so that's, where I come from. But when this started, I had already left particle physics. I'd already been a year in medical physics, and I had already submitted a complaint to Oxford University about what I had witnessed and what has been done to me in medical physics, because my project has been taken from me and I was thrown out of the group by my boss. So that was actually the first time I met the corruption, the real corruption, and it was affecting me directly. But then by the time I was in Germany, I already long left. And what I was doing in Germany is I wanted to start a company. I wanted to launch a startup, and I was attending all sorts of meetings, and those attempts were totally sabotaged. And that's another aspect of this entire Zersetzungsprogram. So it's not just stalking, street theater, and break-ins. It's also infiltration and sabotage of business relationships. So the way that's done is that they infiltrate. So they read your email and listen to your calls, and they know where you want to go. And then they place agents who are masquerading as either businessmen or something else, and they will literally ridicule you. So they will pretend to be serious, and then at some point reveal themselves by saying something ridiculous or literally laughing in your face, or using one of your conditioning triggers from years before, and reveal that they are agents, and then henceforth sabotage your endeavor, and most of the time use what you told them. So there's serious economic sabotage also tied in. And then the final leg in this program that I first began experiencing in Germany was physical attacks. And at first, I didn't even recognize them as such. I just developed a very strange heartache, like an actual pain in the heart region that would then disappear just as magically as it appeared the day I went to the doctor for a blood test. My blood samples would be stolen. Then a few months later, I developed a strange headache that would disappear the day I went to the MRI. And at the MRI, I was stalked all the way into the surgery, into the waiting room. An agent did street theater and then went in to talk to the doctors. And then during the MRI, I was injected with something that gave me, at the time I thought it's muscle twitching, but now I know I was injected with some sort of nanotech. But then henceforth, as soon as I came out of the MRI, my headache had gone. But a few hours later, my muscles started twitching in a systematic pattern. And I noticed it when I went back, I went home, and then I was sitting at my desk, and suddenly individual muscles first would twitch 3 times, and then it would change to another muscle, which would twitch 3 times, and then so on. And bit by bit, over the coming weeks, every single muscle group in my body would be systematically triggered. And I would have days when, muscles would be individually triggered, starting from my left shoulder, going down along my left arm, my left leg, and then up my right leg and my right arm. And this was, at that point, it was pretty clear that my muscles seemed to be remote controlled, remote triggered.
Wow.
So, and it's interesting because now, based on what I know now about biorobotization, nanotech, microchips, and electromagnetic weapons, I can, in retrospect, analyze what exactly had happened. But at the time, all I knew was that something funny was going on with me, and I was being somehow manipulated. And when these muscle twitches started, I thought, so muscles, well, they are working with electromagnetic pulses. Perhaps I'm being pulsed somehow. And that's when I first looked into electromagnetic interference, so with the body. And I very quickly came across electromagnetic weapons. And I looked into it a bit, but I still couldn't quite believe it, So what happened then is we were living in Munich at the time, and after we moved to this flat, which I think was an arranged event, we were desperate for a flat as we were moving down to Munich for the job of my dad.
One suddenly became available, eh?
Exactly, and one was just became available, and then months after we moved in, I just happened to look on Google Maps, and suddenly I discovered, hang on, we're literally 1 kilometer and a bit away from the headquarters of German intelligence in Pullach. So that's called
coincidence, I'm sure.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
So just to finish off the sequence, so what happened then is that I was, when we lived in Munich, the gang stalking didn't just explode. I literally saw, pantomimed out, how the training for young agents was being done. And there were certain days in the year when I was stalked only by children. There were certain days when I was, or entire weeks sometimes, when I was stalked exclusively by Chinese people or Asian-looking people. And I used to call it, the Asia weeks at the BND. So the BND is the German Bundesnachrichtendienst. That's German intelligence. And then also I saw how German intelligence was training up the infiltrators that they would then use for the refugee streams. Because I'm not sure if you remember, but the refugee streams arrived in, I think, September 2015.
Yes, correct.
And in about, I think, April or May 2015, so roughly 6 months before, all my stalkers, or pretty much all, apart from senior handlers, changed to black people and people of Middle Eastern looks. And that was it was literally from one day to the next, because I used to have a bike round. I used to go on a 1 hour bike round, going through Pullach and coming back along the river. Beautiful nature, forest. At the time, I didn't know I'm cycling along, I think, one of the biggest, underground military bases in Europe, but, it was pretty. But I used to be stalked in a very particular pattern with certain watch posts along the way. And people will be either standing at the same spot, smoking, or just popping out of a shop, always at the same spot. And in between these watch posts, there would be people who would be walking particularly slowly. So over a year or two, I worked out who the stalkers were and where these key stalking posts were, because I did the same round every single day. And then suddenly, the people who I knew to be stalkers at these key posts were all black and Middle Eastern. And in Pullach, this is very noticeable because I have not seen a single black person before that time in Pullach. And you have to kind of know that with the headquarters of German intelligence being there, and a huge, it's called a Villengegend. It's like an area where there are only big mansions, so city villas and stuff like that. Very rich people live there, and it's pretty clear that these are the employees of German intelligence and their retired members. And I have to say, they're all German Aryan. You know,
Yes.
they are the old Nazi families who are running German intelligence. And you know, I'm a German of German heritage, German Hungarian heritage, and I've got a German.
Me too. I don't know whether you can guess from my name.
Oh, yes, I see. Yes, you're. So you are in the UK now, is that right?
Yeah. Well, I mean, my parents were German but moved to the UK.
Uh-huh.
So I must say that, like, such is I grew up in London, and you know, so I had that, embarrassingly, I had that classic UK thing of I never really learned to speak another language. My parents never spoke German. My parents never taught me German because they wanted to have private conversations that I couldn't understand. My German is rather poor. I'm working on it, but I wish it was fluent. But yeah, sorry, continue.
So, see, that's very, very interesting, because I will tell you why in a bit.
Sure.
So what happened is that I witnessed all that, and I literally I learned with the trainees how this entire system worked, and I learned some of their hand signs and body signals and so on.
Sure.
So. You know, I can't say quickly, but, you know, with time, I figured out how this thing kind of works. And, but then also in 2015, I think it was, it was exactly the 1st of July, 2015, I was attacked standing on my rooftop terrace from a helicopter with something that could have been a sonic weapon, but could also have been an electromagnetic weapon. I don't quite know. I was standing under a glass roof at the time, and a helicopter that was flying around suddenly stopped above my head and irradiated me with something that felt like intense pressure waves. So maybe that was a sonic weapon. I'm not quite sure what the transmission is for, you know, sonic waves through glass. No idea. But it literally felt like you're standing next to the pressure valves in a swimming pool, you know, underwater. And that definitely came from this helicopter. This attack lasted about 10 or so seconds, or 10-15 seconds. And then this thing flew off. And then 6 weeks later, I was irradiated just like that in the middle of the night, but this time coming from a neighbor. The neighboring flat. And that was also a pattern that has followed me to this day. So people in neighboring flats, when I moved somewhere, would either die or move away, or something very strange would happen to them. And then I would move there, and from the flat where the person died or, you know, disappeared or something, I would be irradiated and attacked. And talking to other victims and my team members, I now have figured out that this is what intelligence agencies seem to do routinely. If they want a flat, they will just kill the person. It literally is that bad.
Yeah.
So then what happened after that, so this was just this one really definite attack with electromagnetic weapons. And otherwise, I just had really strange joint aches that seemed to just, you know, come and go. And always in the same part of the room. Very, very odd. And I didn't really twig it at the time. And then we moved to Switzerland, and the stalking continued in Switzerland. And then I had another demonstrative break-in at the start of 2016, when we came back from the Christmas holidays. And when I said, right, I'm going to go to the police now and just report everything, that's when I was attacked with a microwave weapon for the very first time. So my hand and my foot were burned. And from that day onwards, starting in January 2016, I have been attacked and mutilated and injured with electromagnetic weapons every single day.
Wow.
So I have microwave weapons when you're being shot at, or maybe I still am trying to tell the difference between a sonic weapon and an electromagnetic weapon. But I think these are electromagnetic weapons that they go through walls, and when you're being shot at, what it does is it literally boils your blood. It certainly it pops the capillaries, so you end up massively bruised. So I, started waking up with bruises all over my body, and with time, the attacks just became ever more brutal, ever more painful, ever more crippling. And so I went to court after a few months. I first heard about the Philip Kerr case, and I flew to the UK and spoke to Philip Kerr and his partner after the court hearing. And then I had my own court cases, which were massively sabotaged. I was, after the very first hearing coming out of the High Court, I was stalked all the way to the hotel. And in the hotel, I was so brutally attacked, I collapsed from pain twice. And the second time before my husband. And since then, what has happened is that in May this year, so May 2017, I found out that I'm implanted. Because my colleague Melanie Richan, actually, I first wanted to measure her body implants with a bug detector because she knew she had them. She already had a professional measurement in a Faraday cage. And we wanted to calibrate this bug detector on her. And she looked at me closely, and then she saw that I have got scars on my neck and I've got scars in my face. And she said, "Oh, you seem to be implanted too." And she held this bug detector up to my neck, and it literally set off. So at the time we were measuring in a Faraday cage, and so then I started looking into implants. I also went to the headquarters of Swiss intelligence, and I requested in person a cease and desist from a senior guy, a guy who identified himself as senior members of Swiss intelligence, and nevertheless I was implanted demonstratively in June of 2017, when they broke into my flat and they slit my navel open and they put a microchip in. So now I'm in this situation where they continue to mutilate me. They have just come in here. I'm here with my family in Germany, and they've broken in and they put something into my eye because I woke up with a cut to my eye, and now my eye is inflamed. And they literally continue to mutilate people. And I have now made, I think, 10 cease and desist requests to all British, German, and Swiss intelligence. I had a court case. I have written to all of these. I have written to the attorney generals in Britain and Switzerland. And what has become clear, oh yes, and I also founded this investigative team in January 2017. And what has become clear is that the Western intelligence agencies are not just on a mutilation spree, they are conducting a silent Holocaust.
Yeah.
And it is in full swing. We have reports of all these dead people. There's also a victim in Ireland, and she put out videos where she literally fled to a church, and you can hear her voice shaking as she's telling about all the people dying in her community in Dublin. So yes, I keep getting more and more contacts from credible victims who have cases and who are preparing court cases. And the situation we're faced with now in Britain, Germany, and Switzerland and France, these are the countries, oh yes, and Poland, I know for sure about, is that we have an active Holocaust in full swing.
This was something I wanted to ask you about. I believe everything that you've said, and I think that one thing that people miss when they dismiss claims such as cases such as yours, is that even if you, and I'm not saying you're obviously not on a starting scale, but even if you were a fantasist and you were completely and utterly wrong about everything that you've just said, the fact of the matter is the tactics that you've described are documented documented as having being used and currently being in use by many intelligence services around the world. Moreover, the technology you described exists. So if it's not happening to you, it's happening to someone else. Do you get my meaning?
Absolutely, yes.
Yeah, I guess, like, I mean, you know, why? I mean, this is a twofold question. Why you? But also more generally, why are they doing this to people?
Okay,
to your mind.
Yes, I can answer both, and so the second why me, I'm still investigating, and I think I've there are several reasons why it could be why me, but first of all, let's start globally. Maybe it's easier to understand.
Yes.
My best current knowledge why they are doing this is that this is Agenda 21. So Agenda 21 is the UN agenda for the 21st century, and they put pretty much black and white that they want to get rid of, I think, half of us, or 2/3. And they couched it in very nice language of sustainability and what has been written down. And this is also part of other UN pronouncements that I'm now piecing together bit by bit. So I think what we come to discover, just like in finance, people discovered that the central banks are not what they are masquerading to be. The central banks are private banks. We also will discover that the UN is not what it's actually pretending to be. And the UN, to my best current knowledge, is actually the public face, or one of the public faces, of the global crime cartel. It's extraterritorial. It is now, in a sense, a state in its own right. It has, like the Vatican, it has extraterritorial areas around the world. And I have seen hints and indications of, circumstantial evidence, certainly, that it has become its own nuclear power. So it has an arsenal of nuclear weapons. And suddenly we wake up and we see, hang on, the UN has all these many people. Also, all its personnel has got immunity around the world. So these people have literally a license to kill on paper. And when the UN came out with Agenda 21, there are several people who cottoned on to this and are very concerned and are campaigning. One of them is called, her surname is Corey. I forgot her first name. Laura? I'll have to look into it. Maybe it's Laura Corey. And she's campaigning because she has uncovered that what they are doing is Agenda 21 is a global agenda of communism. So it will be this extraterritorial body called the UN, a group of people who we don't really know who they are and where they come from. And they will determine which areas in a country can be populated, where can you build a house, which should be renaturalized. And that's very interesting because, for example, the California forest fires fall into the renaturalization zones. I'm not sure if you've seen the images of the houses that have literally been, they have vaporized.
No, please send that over.
So this is what has been sent to me by Karen Stewart, the lady who worked for NSA for 30 years. But there are now images from the California fires that show that the so-called fires didn't actually affect a single tree. And I think the area has eucalyptus trees, amongst others, which are highly flammable. And these fires didn't affect the trees, but they totally wiped the houses. So every single house has been burned to the ground clinically. And they are saying, oh, that looks very much like a directed energy weapon from space. Yeah. So when you put these puzzle pieces together, and you also have these things that are called the Georgia Guidestones, that are these sculptures that appeared everywhere around the world, saying that, the population of the world should be something like 500 million.
Yeah, sure.
And then you have the reports of people dying everywhere. I would say that the reason why they are doing it is that this is part of Agenda 21, and the directed energy weapons are the weapons testing and the biorobotization, human experimentation branch of this global systematic Holocaust. But the genetically manipulated foods that we know are carcinogenic are also playing into this. And there are also credible reports from victims that actual toxins, parasites, and pathogens are being actively spread, sometimes through their water supply, sometimes they are being poisoned in their flats, and so on.
Yeah. It would be great if you could send across any documentation you have to not only back up your specific your specific case, but also more generally this kind of environment in which this is occurring. Because obviously some people will kind of almost reflexively find this quite hard to swallow, and I think it's always best to present the best, present as much documentation as possible to back it up, which you evidently do have. So that would be fantastic.
Yeah. So everything I'm talking about is now being written up into not just one court case, but several. So you have to be aware that the amount of work to get, I've got about, I think, 500 gigabytes of evidence and references.
Yeah, maybe not that much.
Yeah. So what I'm working on right now, also for the court cases I support in February, is to cut it down to the to the the logical steps and the key evidence that you need to understand what's going on. But there's so much more that actually goes into this, because I have a stack of victim cases. So I get lots of cases which are fake and actually just agents, making up stories.
Sure. Yeah.
But
wouldn't surprise me at all.
But the ones that I do find credible, what is emerging there is it is one-to-one a Nazi agenda. So the most credible victims I have are victims, for example, who have Asperger's, or mothers with children who have Asperger's, or children with Down syndrome. And there it's pretty clear what's happening. These children were picked because they can't express themselves. So their bodies are being shredded for weapons testing. And the intelligence agencies use the fact that these kids can't communicate. Some can, some can't. Or they're not believed. Yeah. And somehow doctors have a tendency, once a child has got, for example, Asperger's, to assume that, oh yes, well, you can smear it with schizophrenia because, in inverted commas, there's clearly something wrong with its brain. But I just want to point out that the probability for Asperger's and schizophrenia are totally independent statistically. So to have both is even more unlikely than to have each individually. So that's one image that's emerging. The other image that's emerging is that certainly in America and also in the UK, Black people and Asians are targeted, and targeted particularly ferociously. And that's, classic, Nazi, the Nazi program. And also I have written evidence by agent whistleblowers that, and not just one, many actually, that say that the heads of intelligence, British intelligence, are actually eugenicists. So, for example, if you remember Sir John Scarlett, who lied about the weapons of mass destruction and thereby enabled the Iraqi Holocaust, well, he's also reported several times to be a eugenicist. He, in other words, is a Nazi.
Well, the thing that I think is that, a lot of people will probably dismiss this as hyperbole or exaggeration, but fundamentally, if you think, I can only talk about the British ruling class from my own experiences, but the Conservatives particularly, they might not come out and say, "Oh, I'm a eugenicist," but their policies and indeed kind of indirect statements very much suggest that they are. And indeed, in the and I think that this is, as you mentioned with the UN, you need to, the ruling elites know that you need to couch this in fluffy language and do it kind of incrementally and slowly, because in the 1970s, I'm not sure whether you heard of him, there's a guy called Keith Joseph.
Yes, the Rivers of Blood. Yeah.
Yeah, no, that's Enoch Powell.
That's Enoch Powell. Yeah, sorry.
But Sir Keith Joseph, he was a kind of arch Thatcherite who was kind of pushing for Thatcherism before it happened, and he was coming out with stuff saying that the number of children that working class people should be able to have should be limited.
Oh yes, that's the right story. Yes.
He actually did call for the sterilisation of the working class. And
Oh my gosh!
amongst other things.
I didn't even know that. I didn't even know that. But this is fantastic evidence.
Yeah, and obviously this was there was uproar about this at the time, and so it was while lots of people share his kind of his goals and indeed his principles, if you can even call them that. But and like they realised that we can't come out with this publicly. And then you have other examples where like Boris Johnson came out and said, and it was after Margaret Thatcher died, and he said, fundamentally 40% of the population are always going to be useless and stupid and lazy. So there's no point trying to create a better world for them with better education and more opportunities and stuff. And he was attacked by people within the conservative circles, genuinely, because they thought that he'd been far too open about his intentions, not the kind of the substance of what he was suggesting, which they said, yeah, we agree with this, but what we disagree with is you coming out in public because it's unhelpful. And that's really interesting. And and I think fundamentally at the core of so many things, whether it's gutting the National Health Service in this country, or indeed even the I'm actually currently writing an article about this. Like in the UK, police numbers have been reduced and budgets have been reduced by 20% to the point where in certain areas of London, which are where there are which are high crime areas, you might have only 10 police officers on duty at one time. And you can, in my area, which is by no means seriously impoverished, but isn't particularly rich either. It's rare. I can go weeks without seeing a police car. From my perspective as a kind of anarchist, I actually quite like that. But at the same time, it's like there are stabbings are up, murders are up. Deaths in general, whether through misadventure or whatever, are massively up. And you've got to think, there's no the only reason you would cut the police is to allow more crime to happen.
Exactly.
And that's exactly what's happening.
Yeah.
And so I guess that feeds into it too.
Absolutely, and now this is very interesting to hear, because I have left the UK in September 2012, and I had several short trips, but I'm only following it in the news, but I'm not at the pulse of of what's happening in the country anymore. But it's so interesting, because what I get all the victims who report and have video evidence of being stalked by police cars and even helicopters in London. So, while these areas are not policed, the entire police and MI5 helicopters following individuals around.
But also as well, I think that if you talk to anyone who actually knows about the history of British intelligence, like the kind of stalking or kind of bizarre harassment and the kind of inexplicable harassment, and I'm talking about people coming to your door and just smiling at you and then walking away, like that is absolutely bread and butter what the intelligence services do in this country. And I'll send you a link to this, but there's this guy called Anthony Varney who he lives. Sorry, my Skype keeps on exploding. But yeah, there's a guy called Anthony Varney who was in the 1980s, I believe it was. He moved to a village in the UK, and it was near a kind of British weapon research centre, and his house would at night kind of be filled with these awful noises, and it would vibrate, and it turned his hair white possibly because of stress, possibly because it was some kind of biological weapon. And he complained, and the response of the authorities was yes, to just send people to harass him, and you'd get strange letters, or he'd see people in his garden, and when he went out they'd disappear, and all of this stuff. And it's about making people feel intimidated, scared to speak, but also creating these kind of inexplicable and quite bizarre things, which if you said to the average person, they'd probably think someone was just being paranoid or just making it up or imagining things.
Yeah, absolutely. And for me, there's a so because I'm a scientist, there's a set way to because if you like in at CERN, or as a particle physicist, we have to deal with the unusual, the highly unlikely, and detect also stuff that's not known yet. And there is a way to tell. There's even a way to detect classified military research, even when it's not declassified, and that is to just use large enough statistics. So what I'm trying to do now, actually later on today, if I manage, I will release an affidavit template for global survey to actually collect all these things that have been happening. But when I get a victim, sometimes totally unrelated victims and sometimes very uneducated victims will in great detail describe the symptoms of a technology that I have got the patent for, you know? So I have a list of patents and I kind of can estimate what these things can do. And then when you have a group of people from different parts of the world, totally unrelated, never met each other, describing in great detail exactly the same thing, well, that's a certain technology. But evidence like that also stands up in court because it also stands up in science. That's very much how it's done. And also there's another way. I'm not sure, on my website under the FAQ section, I even have a document where I'm proving that, first of all, there's in the UK, you've got something called the Investigatory Powers Tribunal.
Yes.
So that's the secretive court that was set up, I think, in 2000 or 2001.
The Terrorism Act, yes.
Exactly, and to deal with all the cases pertaining to the intelligence agencies. Now, when you just look at their past record of dealing with cases, you can use their own published statistics to prove that they are a corrupted court. I think 99% of all the cases get turned down. And then when you look at how many cases you would expect them to have, so how many mistakes do you expect an intelligence agency to throw up, even if they were well-intentioned, which I'm pretty sure they are not, but even if they were, and these were genuine just mistakes, you know, when you're running a big corporation, something always goes wrong, and there are always a certain fraction of customers who will be, you know, treated unfairly. That's just normal in a big system. Now, when you have something like the intelligence agencies, and they are massive, they have just recently doubled. In 2003, they doubled in size, in their funding, and they are claiming that they only have 10 serious cases, you know, over a 10-year period. Well, they are lying, and you can actually calculate how many cases they are covering up. And it's in the hundreds of thousands. And the numbers of victims with serious injuries is also numbering in the tens of thousands in the UK alone. So we have a huge problem on our hands. And it's interesting you mentioned the Nazi ideology in Britain, because in Britain also, so Britain was rebuked, ironically, by the UN even. So imagine how much that takes. But they were rebuked for the way they treated disabled people. And has become clear now, but I mean, with clears, it's been clear long ago for people who know about finance, but it's now publicly known that country debt is a scam. It is a mathematical trick. So what you are paying is we're paying the bankers for their profit on a loan. So, and that has gone non-linear through the normal mathematics of interest on interest. And that's what this entire country debt scam is about. So austerity is a scam, but austerity.
Of course it is. But this is one thing that really frightens me about austerity, is that, like, even though it's been repeatedly blown apart by academics, and also just by personal experience, and you can point to the fact that the countries that had a similar level of debt to, say, the UK didn't pursue austerity are doing far better economically than the UK is. But people still believe it. They say, oh well, we spent too much on unemployment benefit, or it's absolutely ludicrous. There is not a scrap of evidence to indicate that. But millions of people believe this, and it's absolutely infuriating to meet them today, and especially someone who trained in economics like I did, and just like hearing these people who know absolutely nothing about economics, have never read a single textbook or paper, coming out with such nonsense, but doing so authoritatively because they've been told by the media that this is the case. It's frightening.
It is absolutely frightening, and also what it does is the reason why I stress austerity particularly is because it hit disabled people, but if you turn it around and you just look at the effect, what Britain has actually implemented, it was a genocide of disabled people. It was a targeted killing off. An actual genocide of disabled people. Britain. So the implementation. Yes. So I have to check the numbers of how many people died, but it was over 100,000.
I think this is another thing as well. Is yes, you're right, and I think another thing as well that again feeds into this is the fact that I'm not sure whether you're familiar, but there were lots of changes made to the benefit system, and because the Conservatives claimed, oh well, someone can just turn up and claim they've got a cold and get welfare, which is nonsense. instituted these assessments. So people who were claiming incapacity benefit or sickness benefit or whatever, because they couldn't work because of serious mental or physical health issues or disablement, would be assessed by ATOS. It's that French.
Yes.
There were innumerable cases of people who were kind of blind and couldn't walk, who had serious emphysema, who were judged entirely fit to work, who died within hours of their ATOS assessment, or died within days or weeks of it happening. And for instance, my friend's mother, she suffers from severe mental health problems and needs kind of constant round-the-clock care to ensure that she doesn't kill herself or indeed harm someone else. And yeah, she was judged fit to work last week.
Yeah.
And it's go on. Sorry.
And it's so insane that when you just turn it around, I think what we got wrong in our world is the world view. I mean, we have a biased view, and to this day, it doesn't matter how outrageously they behave, we still assume that it's all with the best of intentions. Yeah. We still assume that ATOS is actually a genuine company. But what if we just turn around and we say, hang on, what if there is an actual Nazi genocide going on around the world, an actual little Holocaust? And what we're seeing here is the old Nazi program of we have to exterminate all the disabled people. We literally have to kill them off. And then, for example, your friend's mother, if she is forced to work and she goes out and she hurts somebody, she will end up in the prison system. And the people in the prison system are used straight out for human experimentation. And they have a high rate of dying. If I just look at the numbers, I have to say we have this whole Nazi machinery in full swing. And then when I speak to my NSA colleagues, so I'm working with somebody from the NSA, whistleblower Karen Melton-Stewart. And she was at the NSA for 28 years, but her area of specialization is exactly weapons development and proliferation.
Yeah.
And then there are two people, I'm not sure if you've heard about the Global Victim Survey by the former technical director of the NSA, Bill Binney, and his colleague Kirk Wiebe. They conducted a very large survey last year. And I think the results are not yet out, but the fact that you have the former Sorry? Oops, are you still there?
Yeah, hello.
Oh, sorry, I just heard, I think, my own voice back. No, I was just thinking that when you have a situation where you have literally the former technical director of the NSA looking into a type of criminality, well, he doesn't do it if he even had a whiff of thinking it's frivolous, So this is just how serious the entire matter is. And also I have to say that within the team, my colleague, Dr. Millicent Black, so she's African American and lives in Tennessee, and what she has mapped out is a systematic murder of her family by an Air Force veteran.
Yes.
And the way that her family members were murdered, and the horrific injuries that they were given in years of torture leading up to that, we recognize the same type of injuries in other people. So people lose, for example, their legs, and it's very unusual for diabetes to be so out of control that you would lose a leg these days. I mean, that's very unheard of. But, she had friends who would lose their legs when they didn't even have diabetes.
Sure.
So, in summary, what we have more and more evidence for is, number one, there is a definite program of killing people off. Yes, intelligence agencies are involved. The injuries and the reports from victims are identical all across Europe and also Australia and the US. But, and this is now the last leg in this, the medical industry is involved in a big fashion. And the implants I found in my body have been partially implanted when they broke into my flat, but also I had surgery and I was implanted there as well. And these are chips that I can measure to be emitting. And I've settled on one bug detector that's super easy to use, and I kind of was trying to teach people how to use it. And I get more and more videos sent where people video film themselves in the middle of the forest in a zero background environment, and they can show that the top of their head is emitting like a mobile phone.
Yeah.
So, now where we're at in 2018 is the following, and this is why actually your interview and everything that you'll write will be super important. Is we have discovered that especially in the UK, the print media and the mainstream media is under lockdown. We suspect with D notices, so these are the gagging orders.
Do not publish,
Yeah, and but because of that, a criminal deep capture in the intelligence agencies can execute a systematic killing off of British people. So this is actually high treason in action now, and we need to break that, and we need to draw people's attention to it, and we also need to get victims scanned. And there are commentators like Katherine Horton, who was the former Assistant Secretary for Housing under George W. Bush, and she thinks that given that all these terror attacks are entirely fake and entirely orchestrated by the intelligence agencies, she was musing that the airport scanners, the actual big metal detectors and so on, are actually, in actual fact, to gauge the chipping level in the population.
Yeah.
So I actually think that's entirely credible. So I keep discovering that more and more people that you wouldn't even think end up chipped. And
I think it's like you see that how the kind of incremental process where you're getting like all of these kind of positive stories about employees at this Swedish firm were microchipped. They can use it to open doors and even pay for things. Isn't this great? And then we're going to get more and more stories about this where we're going to be told, well, actually, if you're not microchipped, you won't be able to do this.
Exactly.
Actually, you don't want to be weird, do you? You don't want to be one of those off-grid people, and it just goes on, and it'll go on and on to the point where children will be microchipped from birth.
Yes.
You see it as well with with other kind of forms of implants. So there's a lot of I've written some tech stories in the past about people who are paraplegic or quadriplegic who have been kind of had implants put in their heads, and they can pick things up now when they couldn't haven't been able to for years, and it's isn't it so wonderful and great and positive, but then actually it has a really sinister side, and which will be the actual end goal.
Absolutely, and we have one case exactly like that already documented, and that's the Air Force veteran Randall Webster.
Yeah.
He was trained in, I think, Washington State at one of these Air Force training bases, and Washington State had a large-scale electromagnetic weapons testing on the population that's already reported. But he also claims that he can steer this weapon system with which he's killing people with the chip implant in his head.
Well, funnily enough, Timothy McVeigh, the guy who was accused of and convicted of, even though I have absolutely no doubt he was innocent. Timothy McVeigh, he was microchipped and spoke and talked about how it would randomly hurt him. He would get random kind of stabbing pains in the area he was microchipped.
Yes. That's impressive, because I have missed that. I missed that he actually claimed that, but that's actually very important evidence, because so the technology that we have so far uncovered and the victim reports and stuff that I've seen myself, I am pretty sure that the nanotech compared with the implants can be used to actually biohack a person and take them over. And I have seen my own parents being taken over. They would so I told the story many times on air, but they would be they started shouting at me. It came to an argument, and then when I changed position in the room, they both continued shouting at the empty room where I stood before. So stuff like that shows you that this technology is much more powerful than we realize. But the actual day-to-day situation that I am in now, and all of my team members are in now, is that we are being actually physically hurt, not just every hour, but pretty much every few minutes, every day and every night. So I have got videoed evidence of being shot into in my flat. And that's it actually puts a dent into metal foil. I have got audio recordings throughout every single night of it sounds like rain. It's actually just individual so-called pulsed energy projectiles machine gunning me. And the same applies to my colleague Ramola. She's being machine gunned nonstop. My colleague Karen just spoke to us a few days ago, and she said that she's now being hurt so badly she doesn't even know if she will make it, through the next week. And this is absolutely serious. So we have actually a hot war on our hands right now.
Anyway, Catherine, I'm afraid I'm going to have to leave it there because I need to step into a meeting at 11:30. But it's been a really, really, really great chatting with you. And if you could send across the audio file, that'd be fantastic. And B, if you could send across any documentation you feel is relevant, I can curate it and go through it myself. And as I say, I will send you a link to the article. Sorry, no, not send you a link. I will send you the article in kind of Word format when it's written. And then I will, what's the word? If you want to make any amendments, additions, or subtractions, just let me know, and I'll make sure that happens. And also do stay in touch because it's been fascinating chatting, and I'd like to keep in touch.
Okay, fantastic. Let's do that. Okay.
Thank you so much, Catherine. Well, take care and keep fighting the good fight. Good luck.
Okay, thank you. You too. Bye.